She got lost after the storm and ended up at the river. Right above the water stood an old house on wooden stilts, as if hovering above the current. The woman knocked on the door, and the old woman let her in without saying a word. But what Anna learned in that house changed her life forever. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. The air felt different the moment she stepped out of the terminal. It was sharp, metallic, tinged with the salt of a distant ocean and the dry whisper of wind that had crossed mountains. Anna Lehman paused for a moment outside the San Francisco airport, adjusting the straps of her backpack. Around her, the city hummed in a language that still sounded foreign to her ears. The taxi horns, the fragments of English conversations, the smell of roasted coffee and car exhaust. It was all too fast, too bright. She didn't come here for that. Her journey was meant to take her far away from noise, into the silent bones of America, where the forest still held its breath between centuries. At 46, she looked both fragile and enduring. There were fine lines around her mouth and eyes, marks of a woman who had smiled often once, and not so much lately. In Prague, she had been an architect, one of the few women in her firm to sign blueprints for large projects. Buildings had been her language, the geometry of safety and reason. But everything solid had broken in the span of a year: her husband's sudden heart attack, the closing of the company, the apartment she could no longer afford. Her mother had told her that traveling was for those who ran from themselves. She didn't argue. Maybe she was running. Maybe she was searching for a place where the noise in her head would match the silence outside. She took the bus north toward the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, where the Pacific Crest Trail threaded through canyons and pine forests. It was a route made for those who needed to be alone longer than was comfortable. In the small town of Cedar Bridge, she rented a tent, a gas stove, a map printed on waterproof paper, and a used hiking pole with a taped handle. The man at the counter told her the weather had been unpredictable that month, the rivers higher than usual. She smiled and said she didn't mind water. The first days of the hike were clear. The sky stretched wide and endless. The pines smelled of sap and rain. The ground was soft with needles and shadows. She walked for hours, measuring distance not in miles, but in breaths. At night she camped near streams, her small fire crackling as she wrote in her notebook. The forest builds its own architecture. Roots are foundations, branches are beams. The river draws the plan. The entries were not meant for anyone. They were her way of remembering what it felt like to notice again. By the third day, the path grew narrower. The air changed, heavy with moisture. Clouds rolled over the ridges, and rain began in a slow whisper. Anna wrapped her jacket tighter around her and pressed on, tracing the faint white markers nailed to tree trunks. She had no fear. There was something calming about being lost among things that didn't care who you were. But as the afternoon dimmed, the rain turned fierce. The earth slicked under her boots, turning to mud that sucked at her soles. Her GPS blinked, then died, the battery drained by cold. When she tried to find the trail again, it was gone. The map in her pocket blurred, the ink bleeding into itself. She told herself not to panic. The rational part of her mind, the part that had once designed buildings with precise corners, insisted there was always a way out. She remembered that water led to people, to roads, and somewhere below her she heard it, the distant roar of a river, deep and certain. She decided to follow it. The descent was slow and treacherous. The rain fell in silver needles, and the trees leaned over her like tall, mute witnesses. She slipped once, scraping her hand against a root, and laughed quietly through the pain. "You wanted silence," she murmured to herself. "Now you have it." When the forest finally thinned, she found herself standing at the edge of a slope. Below, through the veil of rain, a wide river twisted like a dark ribbon between cliffs. Mist hung over it, glowing faintly in the dying light. She climbed down carefully, clinging to branches and stones. At the bottom, the ground flattened into a narrow bank. The water was faster here, churning white around boulders. And then she saw it, at first just a shape through the rain, then clearer as she moved closer. A house. No, more like a cabin, standing directly above the river on tall wooden stilts, driven into the rock. Smoke drifted from a crooked chimney, dissolving into fog. The place looked impossible, almost dreamlike, suspended between land and water. Anna stood there for a long moment, breathing heavily. There was an unease that she couldn't explain. The structure looked both fragile and defiant, as if it had been waiting for someone. She hesitated, then crossed the narrow footbridge leading to it, each plank slick and groaning beneath her weight. The smell of wood smoke grew stronger. She raised her hand and knocked on the door. It opened after only a moment. A small woman stood there, her frame wrapped in a thick knitted sweater, hair the color of ash. She didn't speak, only studied Anna with calm gray eyes that seemed to measure rather than judge. Then she stepped aside, leaving the door open. Inside, warmth enveloped her like a blanket. The cabin was a single room, lit by the fire burning in a stone hearth. There was a table made from raw planks, shelves lined with jars and tin cups, a narrow bed covered in a quilt. The air smelled of pine, bread, and something sweet, maybe dried apples. The woman gestured toward a chair near the fire, and Anna sat without protest. Steam rose from her jacket as it began to dry. The old woman filled a kettle and set it over the flames. The river murmured beneath them, the sound deep and rhythmic, like the pulse of the earth itself. For a while neither spoke. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that exists between two people who understand that words are often too small. When the tea was ready, the woman handed her a cup and said simply, "Elsie Harper." Her voice was soft, but carried weight, as though each word had traveled a long way. "Anna," she replied, her accent thick. Elsie nodded once. "You walked too far from the trail." Anna almost smiled. "Seems so." "Storm's not done," Elsie said, looking toward the window where rain streaked the glass. "You can stay here tonight. It's no trouble." Gratitude rose in Anna's chest, sudden and sharp. "Thank you," she said quietly. Later, when she lay on a narrow cot near the wall, wrapped in a wool blanket, she listened to the sounds around her, the steady hiss of the fire, the faint rattle of rain, the deep hum beneath the floor where the river flowed. The cabin didn't creak or tremble. It felt alive, anchored in some way she couldn't explain. She imagined the stilts beneath her, their roots gripping the stone like fingers refusing to let go. Her thoughts drifted between exhaustion and wonder. How could a house survive so close to the water? Who would choose to live in a place where the river could rise any moment? But the warmth of the fire and the rhythm of the current lulled her. Before sleep took her, she heard Elsie moving quietly, placing logs on the fire, humming a low, tuneless melody. It wasn't mournful, nor was it joyful. It was something between, like the sound of a person who had long ago made peace with solitude. When Anna awoke in the night, the storm had eased, though the river still roared below. A faint moonlight seeped through the gaps in the shutters, painting thin silver lines across the wooden floor. She turned over, pulling the blanket closer. In that half-conscious state between sleep and waking, she thought she could feel the pulse of the house beneath her, the faint tremor of water touching wood, a heartbeat older than her own. By morning, the air smelled of wet pine and smoke. She rose quietly, not wanting to disturb her host, but Elsie was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the river. The light caught her face, revealing a calmness that came only from people who had stopped expecting anything from the world. Anna stepped onto the small veranda outside. Mist rose from the river, curling around the stilts of the house like breath. The forest shimmered with droplets. It was hard to tell where water ended and air began. She closed her eyes, listening. The sound of the current was endless, patient, alive. For the first time in years, she didn't feel lost. Not completely. Something in this impossible house, in this quiet woman who had let her in without question, steadied her. The world beyond the trees felt far away. Her old life, her failures, the noise of the city, even the grief she had carried like an extra limb. Here, everything moved at the pace of the river. She didn't know then that this place, which seemed only a temporary refuge, would soon become the axis of her journey. That the woman who sat wordlessly by the window had a story bound to this house, like the roots of the trees that held the cliffs together. That the river below would one day speak louder than all her fears. But for now, Anna only stood there in the pale morning light, the scent of rain still heavy in the air, and felt something shift quietly inside her, as if the current beneath the floor had begun to carve its way through stone. Morning came slowly, with a pale stripe of light cutting through the narrow space between the curtains. Anna lay still for a while, her body reluctant to rise from the fragile warmth of the cot. She could hear the soft crackling of the fire and the rhythmic breathing of the river below the floor. The cabin did not groan or tremble, the way she expected a house above rushing water to do. It was as if it had long ago accepted its place above the current, adjusting to its pulse, breathing with it. She pulled herself up, rubbed her eyes, and looked around. Everything inside was simple, but arranged with such precision that it seemed deliberate, each item chosen, not merely placed. On the table by the wall stood a wooden bowl with apples, small and bruised but fragrant. A folded newspaper with faded ink rested beneath it, dated several years earlier. The kettle, still warm, sat on a small iron stove. Elsie was already awake, sitting by the window in the same chair as last night. Her hands rested on a piece of knitting, the yarn a deep moss-green color that matched the forest outside. She didn't turn when Anna moved. For a moment, Anna wondered if she should speak, but the older woman broke the silence first. "You sleep quietly," she said, her voice soft, like the sound of dry leaves brushing across wood. "Most people don't, not near the river." Anna hesitated. "It reminded me of home," she answered, though she knew it wasn't true. There was no river near her apartment in Prague, no wooden house to creak with the wind. But there was something in the way the water moved that made her think of the years when her life still had rhythm. Elsie nodded, accepting the lie with the kind of patience that comes from years of living with truths too heavy to speak aloud. "Coffee's there," she said, pointing to the stove. "Help yourself." The mug was chipped, but it fit perfectly in Anna's hands. The taste was bitter and smoky. She drank slowly, letting the warmth spread through her chest. Outside, the fog lifted, revealing the landscape in fragments. Pines bent over the river, a far ridge streaked with morning light, and beyond it, the faint outline of a valley that might lead to a road. But she didn't ask how to get back. Something in her resisted leaving. She set the mug down and asked, almost without thinking, "How long have you lived here?" Elsie smiled faintly. "Long enough for the river to forget my name, and long enough for me to forget its moods." She put the knitting aside and looked toward the water. "My husband and I built this place when we were young. We thought it would be a summer cabin, but we stayed. The world changed around us, but This. She gestured toward the beams, the stone hearth, the sound beneath them. This stayed the same. Anna studied the wooden posts that ran through the floor. They were enormous, thick as tree trunks, darkened by age. She knelt and touched one. The wood was cool, smooth and solid. Whoever built this house had known how to make it last. "It's remarkable," she murmured. "The whole structure it should have shifted by now, with the river moving underneath." Elsie's eyes softened with pride. He knew how to build things that don't move, even when everything else does. Her gaze turned distant. He worked with his hands all his life. After the war, he couldn't stand the sound of people anymore. Said the forest spoke better. Anna said nothing. The silence between them filled again with the murmur of the current. She could almost see it. The young couple cutting planks, shaping beams, raising the frame of this cabin over the water, while the rest of the world sped past them. It wasn't just a house. It was a statement of resistance, of survival. When Elsie rose, she moved slowly but with purpose. She took a metal bucket from beside the door and went outside. Anna followed. The air was cool and damp. Mist drifted like smoke across the river's surface. The old woman stepped carefully down a narrow path carved into the slope, the stones slick from the night's rain. She filled the bucket from a stream that trickled into the river and climbed back up without pause. Watching her, Anna felt a sharp pang of shame. She, who had once designed cities of glass and steel, had forgotten what it meant to build with one's body. Back inside, Elsie set the bucket near the stove and said, "They want to take it away." Anna looked up. The river? The house. Elsie's tone was steady, but something flickered in her eyes. "They say it's not safe, that the ground is shifting, that the water's rising more each year. They sent letters, then men with clipboards. Told me it's condemned. Dangerous. They think I should leave." "Leave where?" "They offered a small place in town. Government housing, they call it. Thin walls, no windows that open. They said they'd move my things for me." She smiled faintly, but the smile had no joy. "I told them my things wouldn't survive the trip. Neither would I." Anna stared at her. "And if they force you?" "They tried," she said simply. "But I've lived here longer than they've been alive. They can take my name off their papers, but they can't take me off the land." She picked up the knitting again, her hand steady. "The law says the property's public now. They're building a dam downstream. When it's done, this place will be underwater." The words struck Anna with a kind of quiet violence. She looked around the cabin again, the walls lined with memories, the careful order, the warmth that seemed to pulse from the wood itself. The thought of it disappearing beneath muddy water made her chest tighten. "Can they really do that?" she whispered. Elsie shrugged. "They can do anything, as long as no one cares to stop them." Later that day, Anna walked outside alone. The rain had passed, and the air was filled with the scent of wet pine and moss. She stepped down to the lower edge of the property where the stilts plunged into the river. Up close, she could see the craftsmanship massive wooden beams reinforced with iron bolts, driven deep into the rock below. The structure was old, but strong, built to move with the water rather than fight it. She crouched and traced her fingers along the wood, noticing where new growth of moss had softened its edges. It was not decaying. It was living. When she returned, Elsie was sorting through a stack of papers on the table letters, official notices, folded maps. One page caught Anna's eye, a black and white photograph of two people standing in front of the same house, decades earlier. The woman in the picture was Elsie, younger, smiling. Beside her stood a tall man with weathered hands and a grin that seemed carved by sun and wind. Behind them, the river looked calmer, narrower, as though time itself had widened it since. Anna picked up the photograph carefully. "He built all this?" "He built everything," Elsie said quietly. "And when he died, they came to measure it, to see what it was worth." The next days unfolded with a quiet rhythm. Anna helped gather wood, cleaned the gutters above the veranda, fixed a loose shutter. In the evenings, they sat near the fire. Elsie spoke little, but each word carried weight. She told fragments of her life, how her husband had been a carpenter, how they used to take in travelers during the summer, how the storms used to sound different when he was alive. The river had taken some things, she said, but it had given others in return. Solitude, patience, a language of endurance. Anna listened, sometimes sketching the house in her notebook. She drew the beams, the way the stilts met the stone, the line of the veranda that seemed to float above the current. The more she observed, the more she understood. The house was not merely standing, it was anchored by will as much as by design. One afternoon, she climbed onto the riverbank opposite the cabin to see it from a distance. From there, it looked both small and immense, a fragile structure facing something that could erase it in a single flood, yet somehow refusing to yield. She took a photograph and looked at it on her camera screen. The image stirred something deep inside her, a recognition she couldn't name. She thought of her old life, the towers she had drawn, the walls she had raised to keep chaos out, and how easily they had fallen when loss came. Yet this cabin, built by two hands and no blueprint, had survived decades of storms. That night, as they sat together by the fire, Elsie said suddenly, "You see, it's not the river that wants to destroy us. It's the men who think they can own it. They say it's progress, but what they really want is silence. No reminders that something older than them can still stand." Anna looked at the flames, at the shadows moving across the walls. "What if you fight them?" Elsie gave a small, almost amused laugh. "I'm 84. They don't listen to women my age. They'll wait until I die. Then they'll flood the valley. That's their kindness." Anna felt a heat rise in her chest, not from the fire, but from anger she didn't know she still had. "Then maybe they'll have to listen to me," she said softly. Elsie looked at her for a long moment, her eyes unreadable. "Why would you care?" Anna hesitated. "Because I think I forgot what it means to build something that lasts. Maybe it's time to remember." The old woman nodded, as if she'd been waiting for that answer all along. "Then you'd better start learning the language of this place," she said. "The river teaches it slow." The storm returned that night. Wind pressed against the walls, and the rain came down in sheets, drumming against the roof like thousands of small fists. Anna lay awake, listening. She expected fear, the kind that comes when nature reminds you of your fragility, but instead there was a strange calm. The house swayed slightly, not in weakness, but in rhythm with the current below. It was alive, moving, and enduring at once. She understood then that strength was not the same as stillness. When morning came, the world smelled of iron and wet earth. The river had risen, but the house stood untouched. Elsie opened the door and let the light in. "Told you," she said, smiling faintly. "It knows how to stand." Anna stepped outside, barefoot, feeling the damp wood beneath her feet. The mist drifted low, catching in her hair. She looked at the river, at the endless motion of it, and thought of the people in offices, the machines, the noise of cities, everything that moved fast, but meant little. Here, even destruction took its time. Later, she sat at the table with her sketchbook open, tracing the foundation lines once more, writing notes in the margins. load distribution, structural resistance, balance with flow. Yet what she was really trying to measure was something less visible: the stubbornness of love, the architecture of memory, the defiance of time. That evening, when Elsie poured tea, Anna said quietly, "I think I can help you prove that the house is safe." Elsie looked up, surprised. "You'd do that?" "Yes. I know what they need to see. Measurements, stability reports, photographs. If we can show that it's sound, they'll have no reason to condemn it." Elsie studied her face, then gave a slow nod. "Maybe," she said. "But be careful. Some things don't like being measured." Anna smiled faintly. "Neither do people." The river murmured louder that night, as if listening. Outside, the moonlight struck the water, and the reflection of the house trembled on the surface. Uncertain, but whole. Anna lay in bed, feeling the vibration through the floor, and realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She was thinking about what could still be saved. And so, while the world slept beyond the valley, the two women sat in their small cabin above the water, one old and rooted like the house itself, the other new and unsteady, but drawn toward the same quiet strength. Between them, the fire burned low, and the river kept its patient song, as if promising that what was built with love would not go easily into the depths. The next morning, the light came through the window in thin golden lines, dust dancing in the air like quiet music. The storm had passed, leaving behind a hush that felt almost sacred. The world smelled of wet bark and cold stone. Anna stood on the veranda, the soles of her boots damp, watching mist curl up from the river. It was swollen from the night's rain, but calm, steady, alive. The house had withstood another trial, as it always did. Behind her, Elsie moved slowly, putting the kettle on, her gestures precise, unhurried. Every movement she made seemed in rhythm with the house, as though both had grown to mirror each other. Anna had slept little. Her mind had been full of ideas, sketches, calculations. For the first time in years, she had felt the rush of creation again, not for a company or a client, but for something that mattered. She saw it clearly now, the way she could defend this place. Numbers, drawings, proofs of stability, documents that could challenge the bureaucrats who believed they owned everything that touched the river. When she turned back to the room, she saw Elsie already watching her, the faintest trace of a smile touching her lips. "You've been awake most of the night," Elsie said. "I heard you pacing." "I was thinking," Anna replied, "about the way the stilts are set, how the weight distributes through the beams, how the river shapes the rock. You were right. It's not unsafe. It's just misunderstood." Elsie chuckled softly, pouring water into 2 mugs. "That's how they describe people like me, too." Anna took her cup and sat near the window. "I need to go into town. If I can find their office, the agency in charge of the dam project, I can see what they've written. Maybe there's still time to contest it." Elsie looked at her with quiet curiosity, as if trying to decide whether this stranger who had appeared from the rain truly meant what she said. "You don't owe me that." "I know," Anna said, "but I owe something to this house, and maybe to myself." When she left later that morning, the forest seemed to open before her, no longer a maze but a guide. She followed a narrow dirt road that curved between the trees, then turned into gravel as she reached a cluster of small houses. The town was little more than a few streets, a gas station, a diner, and a government office built from pale concrete that looked out of place among the pines. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. She asked for the environmental planning department and was led to a man with tired eyes and a badge that said, "W. Darnell." He listened politely as she explained the situation, but his answers came rehearsed. The Harper property lies within the projected floodplain. The structure is deemed hazardous. Compensation has been offered. Relocation assistance is available. Anna set her folder on the desk, spreading photographs and sketches. It's not hazardous, she said. It's structurally sound. The foundation is anchored into the bedrock, not the soil. The design allows water to pass freely beneath it without compromising stability. You're destroying something that's both safe and historic. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Ma'am, I don't doubt your sincerity, but the project's already approved. The dam's construction is a matter of public infrastructure. It's beyond my authority. She leaned forward. Whose authority, then? There must be someone who can look at this data, who can at least consider preserving the house. He hesitated. Try the county commissioner's office. But I'll tell you this, they won't care about numbers. To them, it's about progress, not preservation. She gathered her papers, thanked him, and left. Outside, the air smelled of rain and diesel. The town felt smaller than ever, yet she wasn't discouraged. She had seen his eyes soften when he looked at the photos. There was something powerful in the image of the cabin, a symbol of endurance, of one woman's defiance. Maybe it could reach others, too. That night, back at the river, she told Elsie everything. The old woman listened quietly, never interrupting. When Anna finished, she nodded once. You remind me of him, she said. Your husband? Yes. He used to say that a house is just a voice waiting to be heard. Sometimes the world needs someone to translate it. She smiled faintly. Maybe that's you. The next few days became a blur of work. Anna took precise measurements of the beams and stilts, photographed every corner, every joint, every mark of the craftsman's hand. She created diagrams showing how the water's force was distributed across the structure. At night, she wrote long, impassioned letters to the agencies, to local newspapers, to architectural journals. The house deserved a defense that reached beyond the valley. One evening, as the sky darkened to a deep violet, she found Elsie standing on the veranda, watching the river with an expression somewhere between pride and sorrow. Do you ever think of leaving? Anna asked quietly. Elsie shook her head. I was born not far from here. Every road I've walked eventually brought me back. If I left, I'd still be here in my mind, waiting for the sound of the water. She turned to Anna. You think I'm stubborn? I think you're right. The days passed, and the letters spread. One of the architectural magazines published Anna's piece, accompanied by her photographs and a short introduction she wrote herself. A House Above the River, the story of resilience in wood and water. The response was immediate. Journalists began calling the county office, asking about the Harper property, about why the house was marked for destruction. Within a week, 2 reporters arrived at the valley. They interviewed Elsie on the veranda, their cameras clicking as she spoke about the life she had built, about her husband, about the years when the house had been full of laughter and music. Anna watched from a distance as the old woman spoke, her posture straight, her voice clear. There was no bitterness in her tone, only certainty. When they asked her why she refused to move, she said simply, "Because this is where I learned to stay." The article went viral. People shared it online, calling her the woman who lives above the river. Donations began appearing from strangers who wanted to save the house. Activists sent petitions to the county. For the first time in decades, Elsie's cabin became more than a dot on a forgotten map. It became a story. But progress resented resistance. A week later, men from the agency came again. Their trucks parked at the edge of the path. They spoke politely but firmly, warning that construction would begin in 2 months. Anna stood beside Elsie as they talked. The younger of the 2 men looked uneasy, avoiding their eyes. The older one recited rules and regulations as if reading from a manual. When they left, Anna felt despair pressing at her ribs. "It won't be enough," she said. "They've already decided." Elsie laid a hand on her arm. "The river decides more than they do." That night, another storm rolled through the valley. The wind howled, rain lashed against the walls, and thunder shook the sky. But the house stood firm, its stilts rooted in the stone. Anna sat by the window, watching lightning flash across the water. For a moment, the reflection of the cabin appeared in the river, perfect, bright, and still before vanishing again into darkness. She felt a strange peace then, as if the storm itself had bowed to the house's endurance. When morning came, the men returned. They had expected damage, a reason to condemn the structure immediately. Instead, they found the house untouched. The younger man, astonished, ran his hand along one of the stilts. "Still solid," he muttered. The older one frowned but said nothing. They left without taking photographs. Within days, the story reached the state papers. Reporters called it the house that wouldn't fall. The publicity forced the agency to respond publicly. An investigation was ordered to review the property's safety and historical value. Anna was invited to present her findings. She traveled back to the city, standing before a small panel of officials who regarded her with polite skepticism. But she spoke calmly, clearly. She explained how the foundation had been carved into the bedrock, how the design anticipated floods, how no recorded storm had ever damaged it. Then she spoke of the house as more than architecture, of the life it held, the way it represented craftsmanship and resilience in an age of impermanence. When she finished, the room was silent. One of the panel members, an older woman, finally said, "We'll review the case." Weeks passed. The days grew warmer, the river lower. Elsie's garden began to bloom again. Wild flowers and herbs that she tended in old tin cans. One afternoon, a letter arrived, stamped with the county seal. The house had been granted heritage status. Construction of the dam would be adjusted. The cabin would remain untouched, preserved as a historical landmark. Anna read the letter aloud. Elsie listened without moving, then looked toward the river, her eyes shining in the sunlight. "He would have liked that," she said quietly. "He always said the house would outlive us." For the rest of the day, they worked in silence, repairing the veranda, sealing cracks in the beams. There was no celebration, no triumphant laughter, just a quiet satisfaction that felt deeper than joy. That evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge, the river turned to gold. Anna sat by the doorway, her notebook open. She wrote, "Some houses stand because someone refuses to let them fall. Some hearts too." She closed the notebook and looked at Elsie, who sat in her chair knitting again, the soft clicking of needles blending with the sound of the water. Summer came slowly to the valley. The air grew warm, the nights long. Anna stayed, helping with small repairs, planting new flowers, writing articles about architecture and endurance. She sent letters to friends in Europe, telling them she had found something like peace at the edge of the world. She no longer thought of leaving. The house had claimed her as surely as it had claimed its place above the river. In late August, the first fog of autumn rolled in. The water ran low, its voice gentler, as if whispering gratitude. One evening, Elsie sat on the veranda, her hands folded in her lap. "Do you hear it?" she asked. Anna listened. "The river? It's quieter now. It knows it's been heard." As night fell, the two women sat side by side. The house creaked softly, settling into the rhythm of the current. The stars appeared one by one, their light mirrored on the slow surface of the river. Anna thought about how far she had come, across an ocean, through grief, through silence, to this small house that refused to yield. It had taught her something that no city, no book, no design ever had. That endurance is not about standing still, but about learning to move with what cannot be controlled. When she finally rose to go inside, she looked back once more. The river shimmered in the moonlight, and for a heartbeat, she imagined she saw the reflection of a man standing beside the house, hammer in hand, smiling toward the woman who now kept it safe. The vision faded as quickly as it came, leaving only the water, endless and alive. Inside, Elsie had fallen asleep in her chair, her knitting resting in her lap. The fire burned low. Anna placed another log on it and sat quietly, listening to the heartbeat beneath the floor, the sound of the river, the pulse of the house, the memory of everything that had endured. She closed her eyes and whispered, "You're safe now." Outside, the current moved on, carrying with it the stories of all who had ever stood against its strength. And above it, steady and unmoving, the house remained a small, defiant miracle carved into the edge of the world, where two women had learned that even the river must sometimes bow to love. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more real stories. Watch the next video, share this one with your friends, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from.